Morning. It's Thursday, August 28th, 2025. I'm Larissa. And this is my fat bitch diary. Drinking from skulls. My peppermint tea. Yeah. 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 So, today, yesterday, I hurt really, really badly. This morning, this morning I'm feeling a little bit better. So, the other day, I ate fish, and my body's just not happy with that. I think that's part of it. I hurt really bad yesterday and I had migraine. And I went into I didn't have the migraine when I woke up in the morning. Like it started to develop as the morning went on. I did a little bit of work and then I went into the gallery to do a little more work. And I would have stayed longer to do more work, except I couldn't have the lights on because of the migraine. And there's fluorescent lights in this place, and they trigger migraine for me sometimes. And it was just like, so I came home before I couldn't drive, right? Because I get to the point with when I get migraines, I can't drive, right? To lay down in a dark room, because light makes my head hurt, and smells make my head hurt, and all smells become super super strong, and it's just like, ugh. So I came home and laid down for a while, flat. My back had something pop in my lower back. So I had a yoga instructor um, break my tailbone, or it was he was such a jerk. He was such a jerk. His class was like okay, and I used to go to his class because it was early in the morning, and I could get parking easily. Right? There was another class that I liked better, but it was harder for me to get parking. Right? I had to like leave a lot earlier in order to get parking because anyway, it was in the class I really liked was in Piedmont, and the class that I was taking because ease of parking and comparable time was in Alameda. And anyway, he broke my tailbone. Um, sometimes that hurts in that spot there. I don't know. I just had a lot of discomfort yesterday, and um, hopefully today will be better. I had a lot of really weird dreams last night. Weird, crazy dreams last night. Like just, ugh. And usually I remember everything, but I just had like snippets of snapshots of stuff last night. Weird dreams. Yeah, yeah. So today, anyway, I'm gonna talk about like why I am not interested in working with children anymore. Um, because I've done a lot of work. I've done a lot of teaching and stuff, and um, I'm not interested in offering workshops because I don't want to clean up after other people's kids, and I don't want to put up. I'm not interested in being babysitter. I'm just not interested, and I'm not interested in mentoring one on one. And this is why. Um, last three kids that I had, well, two that I actually worked with and one that I interviewed, right? So the last kid that I interviewed was here in Santa Cruz when we first moved down here. And I was looking for studio assistants, and I reached out to the schools and I was like, "Oh, if you have art student who is interested in going to art school, I'll offer them, assistance on putting together their portfolio for school application for helping me out in the studio here. And the school teacher sends over this little girl, right? And this is before the teacher didn't show up first, right? This girl shows up with her mother first, and we do a little tour and talk and everything. And her mom's an artist. And the little girl was obnoxious, and I wasn't going to offer her the job. I knew I didn't want to offer her the job. And her name was Marina. Like the like the IUD. There's an IUD called Marina. Anyway, I knew I wasn't going to offer her the job. And she sends me an email that evening telling me, oh, I can't take it. I don't want, blah, 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 blah. Well, I wasn't going to offer it to her, and I hadn't offered it to her. I told her that I would get back to her. I would sleep on it, and I would email her the next day. Because that's the way I am. I like to, before I make decisions about stuff, I like to sleep on it, and I usually know right away what I'm going to do, but I like to sleep on it. I think it's a good policy. And so I emailed her mother, and I told her that I wasn't going to offer it to her and why, and that I was going to email the little girl back and be honest with her, because this little girl was extremely entitled. She showed up for an interview for studio assistant and didn't even bring any examples of her artwork, right? And I had posted on my website kind of like a description of what I was looking for, or the description of the position. And when I asked her questions, she just gave back to me almost verbatim what I said on my website. I'm like, okay. You're not giving me any demonstration of being qualified for this position or any reason for me to trust you. And my dog didn't like her. That was the other thing. Brody likes almost everybody. There's only been 2 people that he didn't like, her and one UPS, this one particular UPS guy. And so I was like, I wasn't going to tell her my dog didn't like you, so I'm not going to give you a job. But that was like the cherry on the sundae, right? So I emailed her after I told her mother. Her mother emailed back. She's like, okay. Because her mother had made some comment to me when I was I was talking to her about, she's like, she has to hear it from somebody else because she won't hear it from me. The little girl was a spoiled brat is what it was. She really was. She was a spoiled brat. And anyway, so I sent her an email back and I told her that it was very presumptuous for her to email me to decline a position that I hadn't even offered to her, that I had no intention of offering it to her. And then I explained to her why, and a few days later, she tried to hit me with her car. Yeah. Snot-nosed, obnoxious teenager. Yeah, so there was that. And then, I don't know why I guess I thought maybe a new community, kids, that there'd be difference in kids. So this was pre-COVID. That happened. I mean, when we were in Oakland, I worked with 2 girls. One young woman was in high school and one-on-one mentoring, and the other one was in 3rd or 4th grade. Right. Her father lived in the building. Her father was a photographer and lived in the building. And he approached me. I did not approach him. When I saw I had met the little girl a few times, and she, she was a little odd, right? And her father explained to me that she didn't really have a whole lot of friends, that they were having that he and her mother were divorced, and that she spent most of her time with her mother, and that she was having trouble in school, and that she had trouble keeping friends, and that she became part of her issue was like she was very, very possessive and jealous, and like she had a friend, and that friend had another friend, and she became aggressive with her jealousy. And and like I said, she was a little odd. She was a little precocious and very um, kind of mature for her age, kind of thing. And so she liked me, and this is what her dad said. And I mean, I was nice to her, right? Um, and so he asked me if I would spend some time with her, because he said, "Oh, I think it would be good for her if she spent some time with a woman other than her mother." I'm like, okay, because so like once a week she was coming up to my apartment from his apartment, or was like no, because she stayed with him every other weekend. So it was every other weekend she would come up for a couple hours, and I could do stuff like on it would be on a day when I was baking bread, or stuff like that. Uh, One time I was working on these, I was making these cat dolls. Um, they were like doorknob hangers. They were kind of cute. They were dolls, and I was making them for nieces and nephews for Christmas. So I had them all laid out, and so I let her make one, and I helped her with the machine and all that kind of stuff. So these were the kinds of things that were going on. So I planned for that time. It was on a Saturday afternoon or Sunday afternoon, something like that. It was like an afternoon kind of thing. Well, this one day she comes to the she comes up to my studio, to my apartment, because it was a live workspace. I had my gallery and my studio, and we also lived there. It was a loft, an artist loft. The whole building was. And she had, I wear my bush I would wear a babushka when I was doing stuff in the house, and so she showed up with a babushka on, right? Because I always had one on. So she had one on. I'm like, okay. But her demeanor was changed. It was different. And in that place, our bathroom, I had markers in there for drawing on the wall. Anybody who came to visit, like that bathroom was all covered in graffiti, because anybody who would visit could stand in there and draw on the bathroom wall. She was in the bathroom for a really long time, and she had asked me a bunch of strange questions, right? Um, Above my kitchen sink was where I had my crucifix hanging, and she asked me about she didn't know. She's like, "Who's that?" And I I didn't want to come off as trying to like indoctrinate her about anything. So I just said, "Oh," I said, "That's just a guy. He had a whole lot of friends, and some of the friends didn't like each other, and so they ganged up on him, and that's what happened. And they killed him." And she's like, "Oh, okay." Right? Like, what was I going to say to her? I wasn't going to give her. It wasn't my place to give her any kind of religious spiel. So I just gave her kind of like a synopsis of what overhead of what the story was. But then she had asked me a whole bunch of other questions, right? And she was in the bathroom for a really long time. I was starting to get a little concerned. So I went and knocked on the door, and she opened it. And she wasn't on the toilet. She was drawing. She'd gone to the bathroom, used the bathroom, whatever, but she was standing there drawing on the wall. And I said, "Oh," I said, what are you drawing here?" And she had this weird picture. It was like two women's faces, or two faces and it looked like women, right? Like, and the one had a big X on the forehead. I said, "What's going on here?" And she's like, "Oh, there's these two women, but this one's evil, and she's got the mark of evil on her head." I'm like, "Okay." I said, "How about we go back, because we were doing other stuff, right?" Um, I was making hummus, and I was making a mezza is what I was making. I was making a mezza, and she was like helping me make the hummus and all that stuff. So let's go back out there. So we went back out into the kitchen and got the table all set and everything. We sat down, and she starts asking me. She's like, "Have you ever had a friend really hurt you?" I said, "Oh yeah, sometimes." I said that happens sometimes. I said, and you have to decide if the friend's a really good friend and if the hurt is a big hurt. Right? If the hurt is too big, then you don't have to be friends with somebody. So you can make that choice. And she said, and then she starts telling me, she's like, "Well, have you ever had a boyfriend?" I said, I said, "Well, I'm married, so I don't have a boy. I don't have any, boyfriends. I have friends that are boys." She goes, "That's what I mean. A friend who's a boy." I said, "Okay." She's like, "Have you ever had a friend who's a boy hurt you and then give you a present?" So I'm like, what is going on here? And I'm like, well, yeah. And I said, yes, I've had that happen. And I said, and I don't speak to him anymore because it was a big hurt. And, um, and I said, did somebody hurt you? And she starts talking about her mom's boyfriend playing dolls with her and that he tickled her and it hurt. And she asked him to stop and he wouldn't. I'm like, okay. Well, her father was a little strange too. And he used to go, and I know from experience, like in high school, I had a friend whose brother was accused by a boy that he babysat. He used to babysit a set of siblings, and the one boy accused my friend's brother of molesting him. But it wasn't, in fact, when they investigated, it wasn't, in fact, my friend's brother. We all knew that. We all knew that. It was the boyfriend of the mom, right, who was doing it. So, like, kids will do that sometimes. Like, they will tell somebody about an abuse, but say somebody else did it. Sometimes they'll make somebody up, or they'll choose somebody else because it's like, because the person who's doing it's too difficult, right? So I was a little bit concerned because there was a couple things that her father had said to me. I'm like, that's just not appropriate, right? That he'd said about this little girl and about this little girl's mother. I'm like, this is just not appropriate. And so she's telling me this. I'm like, okay, because I'm willing to. I was willing to be open to this, and I'm like, okay, I don't know for sure. I just know what she's telling me. So when the father came to pick her up, I mentioned the drawing in the bathroom to him. And he said, "Oh, yeah, I've been fighting with her mother because she's been letting her watch horror movies." I'm like, okay. I'm like, okay, that's. He's like, her mother's Japanese and that's okay in her culture. I'm like, that didn't make sense to me. So he had also told me that he had been banned. He was a photographer, and he used to travel to remote places and photograph women, in particular, women and girls. And he had series from like Cuba and Haiti and Tibet, and the country of Tibet banned him from coming back. He wasn't allowed to come back to the country, right? And he told me some story about, like, he had this woman that he was engaged to in Cuba and had been for like 7 years, and because of embargo they couldn't get her over, and all of this stuff, and she was supposed to be coming. Oh, she eventually did, and she left him because she said he was crazy. um anyway, I was a little concerned, right? Well, his mother would come and stay every couple months with him and the little girl. And I had met her a couple times too. And so this one day, she was arriving, and we took the elevator together upstairs. And because he was on the second floor and I was on the fourth. And she said, "Oh, I just wanted to thank you so much for taking the time to bake bread with the little girl and everything." She said that's she says as a grandma, I really appreciate that there's somebody doing those things with her. And I'm like, okay. I said, well, I'm really, I'm, you know, I said, you're welcome. I said, I want to mention something to you. And I told her about what the little girl said to me. And she was like, oh, well, thank you for letting me know. I said, there's something going on. I said, I don't know what, but I said, somebody did something to her. And after that, then her father says to me, this was like a few days after that, or no, it was the next day. We're out. I see them in the hallway, and he kind of like pulls the little girl away from me, won't let her say hi to me, and I'm like, okay, that's a little weird. And then a couple days later, he says to me, "I don't see. I want to say the girl's name. She's not going to be coming up to see you anymore." I'm like, okay, that's fine, because he wasn't paying me. I'm like, whatever. Well, then it got back to me. It got back to me from by other people in the building that he was telling people, oh, somebody on the fourth floor is trying to molest my daughter. And that was not the case at all. Right. And so when I found out he was trying to put that off on me, after I told the grandmother what I suspected was happening, that there was somebody hurting her because of what the little girl said to me, I was like, oh, no, no, no. So there was that. And then there was the teenage girl who was the daughter of a woman that I was friends with, or I thought I was friends with. Actually, I was friends with this woman's mother, is what it was. And her mother was dying of cancer. And they knew that I was a Reiki practitioner. And I had been going over to give the grandma who I was friends with Reiki weekly. Well, they wanted me to come over more than once a week. And I said, well, I can't really fit that into my schedule. I said, but I said, if you want, I'll train you and your daughter, because, they spend every Sunday afternoon after church with her. I said, I'll give you guys the training. I said, then you can do it. And she said, "Oh well." She says, "Oh well, why don't you can?" I gave her the book to look over and explain to her what the training was and everything. I said, "Oh well, why don't you can come do this together." She's like, "Well, why don't you just do it for give the training to my daughter, and then my daughter can do that." And I'm like, "Okay, we can do that." And then the little girl was having, again, mother told me, they were twins. She was a twin, and her twin was doing just fine, but this one little girl wasn't doing well in school. She was having trouble, right? And it was like a marked difference. And the situation was complicated. Like she was having trouble dealing with her grandmother dying. So her grandmother did eventually die. She had pancreatic cancer. But she also had some other, she had a speech impediment, and everybody in the family called it an accent. It wasn't an accent. She had a speech impediment, and it was severe. Um, and there was something going on with that. But this woman said to me, she's lying to me about things all the time. And little girl was super, super skinny. And the mother confided to me that the father had an eating disorder. They were also hoarders. The house was insane. But she said she was really concerned because, like, the little girl was really into like Japanese culture, and they went to this Japanese bakery and got these. She said they were really expensive. She was these little things. She's like, they were really expensive. She's like, they were cool. They looked really cool. And that's why they were expensive, because they were like fancy little sculpture desserts, right? She said we were all supposed to have them together. Well, the little girl ate all of them by herself and then lied to her mother about it and threw them up. And like and this kind of behavior was becoming worse and worse. And so she said to me, she said, I think she just needs a little bit of extra attention. And she was into art and things. And so I said, okay. I said, well, I'll do some, we were doing still lifes and stuff like that, because like I said, she was like a freshman in high school. Still lifes and we were doing some like making some garments because I was doing a lot of sewing at the time, right? So I'm like, okay, we can do this. So there were a couple things that happened. One, we had a camera on our front that was in our front hallway to catch one of our cats was pooping in the hallway. We're trying to figure out which one it was, and so we put up this camera. And I told her we were working on making a garment. We were talking about fitting a garment, and she was making something for her. And so we had the garment, and I told her, I said, okay, go put it on. And then come back. We were in the studio. I said, go put it on. Well, assuming that she would go into the bathroom and put on the garment. Well, she didn't. She went out in the front hallway and put on the garment. And so I was like, I have this teenage girl in her underwear on my camera, and I'm like, no, this is not. I'm like, I'm not comfortable with this, and this is not going to happen again. So like I texted Omar immediately when I realized what had happened. I said, don't look at the camera. I said, please just delete today's entire footage. And I told him why. So he did. Well, then after that, her dog died. And like I said, they were hoarders. The house was filthy and the dog had a skin infection and the dog died. The dog was super sweet. And then they also had in the house a bunch of guinea pigs. And like I said, it was a hoarder house. Well, a bunch of the guinea pigs died. Well, the little girl starts telling people that I'm a witch and that I killed these animals. I'm talking about that girl that I mentored in Oakland. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Hold on. I'm talking about why I don't want to work with children anymore. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, so the community where I was living and the church that I was going to, because where I met them at church, and this was after the grandma died, after the grandma passed away. The grandma passed away, the dog passed away, these guinea pigs passed away, and her aunt had a stroke in her back and had to relearn how to walk, right? All of these things kind of happened. So it was a lot. It was a lot for anyone. And I had concern for like everybody, right? Because that was hard on everybody. But this one little girl in particular, it was like, well, she starts telling people in the community that, I'm a witch and that's what telling people that I'm a witch and that's why all of these bad things happened to them. That I killed the animals. No. 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 But like I said, the community that I was in, this church community, was extremely superstitious, and they were calling me Blanca Bruja. They thought I didn't know what that meant, but that's how they referred to me. Or not everybody, but there were a number of people in the church that when they were talking about me, that's how they would refer to me. Right? And I'm not. And then after they started saying that, there was the priest gives a homily this one time about how even white witchcraft is witchcraft and it's evil of the devil and all this shit. I'm like, oh my God. Now you got the priest. You're telling the priest I'm a fucking witch. And the superstitious fucking priest thinks I'm a witch. And I had nothing to do with any of this shit, obviously. Nor did Reiki. I mean, my friend who passed away from the pancreatic cancer, there was nobody else in the family who had it. And she was getting special treatment from the VA. And when I talked to her, the first time I went in to work with her, Reiki wise. Um, she says, I asked her, were you exposed to depleted uranium munitions? And because she was a combat veteran. Um, and she said yes. She said, and also in training that she had been exposed to gas when they did their drills. And I can't remember if she was right-handed, left-handed. Anyway, she carried the butt when she shot the butt of her rifle. When she carried her rifle, the butt of her rifle was up against her left side. And so the magazine would have been up against her left side as well. And like I said, she told me that they had used depleted uranium munitions, and that's why the VA was giving her like extra special treatment because they suspected that her cancer was a result of her exposure in the military to these things. But the little girl was telling people in the community that I was a fucking witch. Yeah. Oh my God. So I was like, no, because there again, they weren't paying me. They were friends of mine, right? Or I thought they were friends. Like, but so I don't want anything. Oh, there was the other boy that I worked with in one-on-one in Oakland, and it was I can't say I won't say his name. I won't say his name. Anyway, um, I had a friend who ran a program um, that was for kids. He was a Shriner, and he was doing this program for kids that were in the foster adopt system. And it was like once a month he had it was like a music, it was like a little like open mic kind of thing, but it was specifically for this group, right? And he asked me if I would come, and participate, and that then he could pair me up one on one to mentor youth, right? That's what this was. That's what this was. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So I went a few times, and there was a young man, um, who excellent, amazing guitar player. And so we rehearsed together a couple times, and it was just about, he was saying he's like, these kids really need healthy adult relationship. They were coming out of very abusive situations, and this kid in particular, he was having some gender dysphoria, and I wasn't going to tell him yes, no, or anything about what he was feeling or whatever, or what he thought. But I also knew that he was coming from a situation where he had been pimped out by his mother, his birth mother, right? Like that was the background information that I had. And so he was extremely inappropriate sexually towards me a couple times. Like he never touched me or did anything like that, but was very suggestive in his behavior and things that he said to me. And I always just like pretended like I didn't see, and just stayed even keel about, our interaction and everything. Um, and he was starting to make some progress, and we went and did an open mic um, together, one that I went to regularly, and I thought it was like going to be a supportive place. It was at El Rio, which is a gay-owned bar, and in San Francisco. And we went there for this open mic. Well, I don't know what he did. I didn't see whatever the behavior was, but they kicked him out. And so I had to go too because, I mean, I didn't get kicked out. He did. And I had talked to them. I had talked to people before I showed up, letting them know who I was bringing in and why, and what, I didn't tell them everything, but that this was an at-risk youth that I was working with, and things. And the potential of being a member of the LGBTQ community, I thought that they would be supportive. Well, like I said, I have no idea what he did. I didn't see it. Um, but his reaction when he got kicked out was bizarre. Like he was having a temper tantrum, and he was spitting all over the place, and like it was really really bad. And I told him, I said knock it off. I said get in the car. I said I'm taking you home. Well, when I got him back to his foster, because I met his foster mother. I met his foster mother before we left, and I introduced myself and everything. Um, it was the first time I had met her. My interactions with him up to that point had been through this friend of mine who was the Shriner who had the program, right? So this was the first time I met his foster mom. Um, I took him home. Before he got out of the car, he was sitting in the back seat. On the way there, he sat in the front seat with me, but on the way back, he sat in the back seat and he like whimpered like a baby. Like he was 18. He was 18, but he was behaving literally like a 4-year-old, right? And before I got out of the car, he grabbed me from behind and he hugged me and he gave me a kiss on the cheek. He says, "I love you, Mom." And then he got out of the car. Well, after that, I wasn't able to get a hold of him. He wouldn't return phone calls, right? And I wasn't going to go knock on the door, right? Because he was 18, so I had his contact information. I didn't have the foster family's information. It was a situation where they hadn't adopted him and he had aged out, but he was still living with them, right? Like, so I was really upset after that. That was really, really hard. That was really, really, really hard because I was worried for his well-being, right? So this is why I'm not interested in working with kids anymore. I'm tired of it. I'm tired. I'm not interested in having somebody's kid try to hit me with their car. I'm not interested in, you know, when you work with kids, you're a mandated reporter. I'm not interested in having to report on somebody who's going to come back and try to say, that I'm the one doing the shit, and I don't want any more heartbreaks, right? So, no, I'm not interested. I'm not interested. And after doing all that work, no, I don't want to go back to teaching spoiled rich brats either, because I've done that too. Spoiled rich brats who don't understand what a privilege it is for them to have access to the materials that their parents afford to give them, and they're shitty parents who treat you like you're a fucking servant. Shitty tech parents, shitty rich bitch tech parents who treat you like you are some fucking low life idiot piece of shit. Oh, art teacher. Oh. Right? So no. No, no more. No more. No more. And nobody else gets to work in my studio. My studio is my workspace. No. I've sacrificed and waited and worked too hard to let somebody go do what I did. And someday maybe you'll have your own fucking workspace. Nobody's doing any workshop in my space. And my work's not recreation. My work is academic pursuit. And no, just no, just no. Anyway, that's why I don't work with kids anymore. That's why. And I'm not even talking, I didn't even talk about the girls in the detention center. Right? Or the homeless kids that I worked with. Oh my God. Yeah. Anyway. And I did all of that work for free. I was never paid a dime for any of it. Never. Wasn't paid a dime. Yeah. But I certainly took my pound of abuse for it, didn't I? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I think maybe tomorrow. Maybe tomorrow I'll talk about the work I did, the anti-gang violence work I did. Maybe I'll talk about that. The anti-gang violence work I did in Oakland. I'll talk about that tomorrow, and how those people repaid me. Anyway, no more volunteer work for Larissa. No. Shove it, Obama. Shove your volunteerism up your ass.